objective criterion, find a mathematical solution and do it. Okay. And so his two contributions, the second was the one I've just mentioned, the introduction of optimization criteria. And the other is that the communication of information is basically a statistical problem. If from point A you want to send information to point B, if there's only one message that you want to send, all different messages are known to everyone, then there's no communication of information. You must have at least a choice between two different messages at A. You choose one of the messages and you send that to B. Then he gains information because he knows which of these. But the two messages may occur with different probabilities, so you have to formulate this as a statistical problem. Shannon gained from that insight when he formed his theory. There's one of the pictures of Shannon. He did his work at MIT, at Bell Labs, of course, and then came to MIT. And I might tell you a story. I wrote to Shannon at Bell Labs from Pune because I wanted copies of the Bell Labs had these blue-covered reports, some of you may have seen. And actually I got a reply from Shannon, and he sent me many of these things. And I had mentioned that I had got admission to MIT, and so he said, yes, I'm coming there. I'm joining the faculty, so I'll see you there. When I went to MIT in 1957, he wasn't there. He had gone to California for a year. And when he came back, his office was in the same corridor as me. And in the hall one day, I said, Professor Shannon, I'm so-and-so. He didn't remember, of course. He said, but there must have been something about your letter that intrigued me, because I hardly ever reply to letters. So if I replied to you, I must confess, I lost that letter. Otherwise, I could probably have sold it on eBay. Yeah. Anyway, so Shannon paper had several contributions, but one of them really overthrew the conventional wisdom, which is that when in the presence of noise, people all believed firmly that if you wanted to send information reliably, the rate at which you send the information, the rate means, say, the number of messages, for example, per unit time, that must decrease. For example, in the standard method known as ARQ, you repeat. If you're talking to someone and he can't hear it, it happens more and more with me, I ask him to repeat it. And, and in communications, you take a majority. So you repeat it 3 times and take an average. But even then, there will be, if there is noise, some probability of error. So if you want 0 probability of error, you can imagine that you really must repeat it an infinite number of times, which means that you're only sending that one message. The rate of communication is 0. So people believe that if you wanted arbitrarily reliable communication, you must do it slower and slower. Shannon said no. There's a number, he said, called the channel capacity, which is defined by the noise in the channel, the impairments in the medium, and so on. And this number has the property that if you are sending at a rate which is less than this capacity, you can, by clever coding techniques, send it at any probability of error that you want, 10 to the minus 6 or 10 to the minus 10 and so on. But if you try to signal faster than that, you will have chaos. Okay. So this was a striking result. It overthrew the conventional wisdom. The only problem was that Shannon's proof that this could be done is what is called an existence proof. He proved that there had to be a method of doing this, but he didn't know what was the method. So for a long time, people were trying different methods. All kinds of mathematics have been used to do that. But it took, first of all, about 30 years. And the compact disk was one of the first applications of this theory. But in the last 10 years, people have invented methods called turbo coding and LDPC codes, which are used in all the handset wireless systems now, where for the wireless channel or any channel, you can achieve the channel capacity. Okay. But what is the value of theory? You see, it sets these fundamental limits. And let me give you a personal example. We had started a company. So one of my students is the pioneer of DSL, John Chiaffi. he started a company. But a few years later, and one of my students was his early employees, we formed a company to do symmetric DSL for businesses, we thought, because the conventional DSL is asymmetric, what you have here. You download at a higher speed and you upload at a slower speed. But we thought between two business offices, there's no asymmetry, you must have symmetric DSL. So we raised some venture money and we had this company. And while we were doing the work, a company in San Diego, we were in the Silicon Valley, said, oh, and there's a limit in DSL. You have to be within 3 miles, that's what people believe, of the central station, because you need a direct connection. More than that, it's difficult. And there's a company which said, no, long loop DSL. We can do 20 miles, which, wipes out the rationale for our company. But when we looked at it, that's impossible. The channel capacity says that at most 3 miles for most channels. So there must be something wrong, because the VCs were skeptical. But we said, look, no, here are the calculations, impossible. It was actually, that company folded in a couple of years. So one reason for knowing limits is you don't waste your time in fruitless efforts. In fact, there was a paper in circuit theory. Shannon had many interests. Hagelbarger and Shannon. It starts out as follows. They were trying to build a certain circuit to do something. And several months passed, they were unable to do it. Then it occurred to them that maybe it's impossible to do it. And they proved that. Okay. So anyway, Shannon... So that was Shannon's concept. And now it is routine. It took about 50 years and a lot of work, and many things were learned in between, of course. Failure is not always has value too. One of Shannon's contributions was the following. He said, messages are of different types. There's speech, there's music, there's image, there's television, and so on. We want a universal language to characterize all these messages. So the natural thing is to digitize and make them bits, ones and zeros, for example. But some of you may know, and maybe in Sanskrit there are equivalent phrases, but I remember Shannon one day came to class and someone had sent him this message, this quote from the Bible, which is familiar. Somehow Shannon was an atheist, actually. So, but if you can read it, it says from the Bible, let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. In other words, 1 or 0. Anything that's more than this is evil. Now, this work soon began to be applied in many different fields. Radar was one of the first applications, which was sort of the problem that Wiener had started with. Radar, sonar, coding and decoding algorithms, image processing, speech compression, speech recognition. And now there's hundreds of journals, at least 25 IEEE transactions on different aspects growing out of this work. And actually it has also led to new results in mathematics. And as I said, let me, on a personal note, I have enjoyed this profusion of subjects because I like variety, like many of you, I'm sure. And here, my students on my 60th birthday had organized a big event, and they made this pie chart of my publications in different fields. Let me... information theory, where I started in the 60s, about 15% of my publications are there. Then I moved to control theory for another decade, roughly. And then the next decade to signal processing. In the meantime, I also did various mathematical subjects, another 15, 20, and so on. So mathematical engineering has a diversity of applications. And a bird's eye view of my research, as I said, it started in multipath channels, which actually led me to some contributions to India in 69, 70, because at that time, India was building a radar network across the Himalayas, because, as you know, they had suffered in the 62 war. And so Professor Iyer was widely connected. And one day I happened to be on sabbatical there. He had a call from Air Vice Marshal Narasimhan, saying, we have this problem. They use what is called troposcatter, not the traditional method, but it's a multi-path channel that they use. Do you know anybody who can help us with this problem? And Professor Iyer said, there's someone here who did his thesis in that topic. So actually, I became a consultant to Government of India, but I don't know how much that work went because it got classified soon after. But one contribution was that I persuaded Mr. Serene, who was the Defense Secretary, that as in the US, the defense services should sponsor broad research areas in electronics and communications. And in a period of, and it took some time to persuade Mr. Serene, because he said, we can give scholarships. I said, in a period of 2 months, he set up